On this episode of Once Upon a Time in Black History, I will be sharing information about the life of David E. Harris, the first African American to fly the friendly skies for a commercial airline. But first, the backstory, and there's always a story. So let's start with a Mr. Marlon Green. Marlon DeWitt Green was born June 6, 1929. He was an African-American pilot whose landmark United States Supreme Court decision in 1963 helped undo racial discrimination in the American passenger airline industry. Now, this decision is what led to David E. Harris's hiring as the first African-American pilot for a major airline the very following year. And after that decision, Marlon Green was also hired by Continental Airlines. He flew for them for over 20 years. So now let's start with Marlon's story. He was born in El Dorado, Arkansas. He joined the Air Force, and his last assignment was flying the SA-16 Albatross. This was at Johnson Air Base in Tokyo, Japan. So, as the story goes, in 1957, while on leave, he applied for a pilot position with Continental Airlines. Marlon knew what would get him an interview. He did not answer the racial identity question, and he did not provide a picture. I suppose you can already guess what happened after the interview. Yep, 5 other white applicants, less qualified, mind you, were hired. No surprise there. On April 22, 1963, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Colorado Anti-Discrimination Commission versus Continental Airlines that Marlon Green had been unlawfully discriminated against. Now imagine that. Good news. This led to David Harris getting hired in 1964 with American Airlines. He became the first African-American pilot for a major passenger airline. This was good news for Marlon also because he was hired and flew for Continental from 1965 to 1978. And he actually became a captain in 1966. Marlon died at the age of 80 in Denver, Colorado. Okay, now for David Harris's story. This one's a bit different. Marlon had actually set the stage for this young man. David Harris, born in Columbus, Ohio in 1934. And it was while he was in the Air Force, in the ROTC program at Ohio State, he became interested in flying. Now, here's a quote from a magazine. Okay, here's a quote from a magazine about that choice. He said, "I think my early interest in flying came as a matter of chance and circumstance," he said. "I cannot remember having a burning desire to be a pilot as a boy. Maybe it was there, but out to the back of my mind because there were no minority. Maybe it was there, but out to the back of my mind because there were no minority role models out there as airline pilots. World War II and the Tuskegee Airmen had come and gone, and they were not accepted and therefore not seen in the commercial arena." End quote. So while in the ROTC at Ohio State, he realized that there was an opportunity to get a second lieutenant's commission. He would go into the Air Force and learn to fly. So he did join the Air Force in June of 1958. This was a year after Marlon Green had started his court battles with Continental Airlines. Now, David completed his military duties in December of 1964, and it was a year after Marlon Green won his fight. And this was the year after Marlon Green had won his fight. While in the Air Force, David was stationed in Florida, Texas, New York, and Maine. He flew B-47s and B-52s. These were those turbojet bombers. Now, 2 days after he left military service, he was hired by American Airlines. David stayed with American Airlines 30 years, flying many of the big buses like the 747, the 727, and the 767. He retired in 1994. Now, within a year after David was hired, other black folks were hired as well. A few names are Fred Pitcher with Western Airlines, Bill Norwood with United, Les Morris with Eastern, John Gordon with TWA, Sam Grady with Delta, Woody Fountain, Northwest, Irvary Carter, DHL, and M. Perry Jones with Pan Am. Now, in 1978, that was the beginning of implementing regulations and furloughs. Also, airlines began merging with each other, and that created more pilots and not enough jobs. Now, you can imagine what happens next. Yep, black pilots, being the last in the door, were the first out. During this time, there were approximately 100 African American commercial pilots. Now, in the 1880s, there were about a few hundred. While this may sound like a lot, the total number of American pilots during that time was approximately 30,000, spread over 10 airlines. So for black pilots, that was less than 1%. Today, the total number of African American pilots is around 500 out of 50,000 pilots. It appears things haven't progressed that much. David Harris retired from American Airlines in 1994 as a captain, flying American's largest airplane at that time, the wide-body MD-11. A humble man, Harris made this statement at a ceremony in his honor. He said, "I'm honored and humbled by this award, but the reality is that there were 500 pilots, Tuskegee Airmen, who were qualified for airline jobs when they left the service. None of them received an opportunity to sit in a cockpit." Now imagine that. So if you'd like to read more about David Harris, visit avstop.com or npr.org or blackpast.org.